Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming to this new installment of the STEAM Salon. We are honored to welcome today Jon Froehlich. Froehlich?
It's good. Yeah.
It's good, okay. Assistant Professor in Human-Computer Interaction within the Department of Computer Science at the University of Maryland. His research focuses on designing, building, and evaluating interactive technology that addresses high-value social issues such as environmental sustainability, computer accessibility, and personal health and wellness. His accomplishments are numerous, but I'm going to only mention the latest two that he just received, and he was named the Salon Foundation Fellow for 2017 and received the 2017 National Science Foundation Faculty Early Career Development Award. So, Jon, take it away.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. So today we're going to be talking about the role of wearable computing in learning, specifically STEM learning. So, as Navinka mentioned, I'm a member of the Human-Computer Interaction Lab, but I also direct the MakeAbility Lab, and that's my research group. Here we are when I first got started as a professor back in 2013 about, and here we are more recently, so we've kind of diversified a bit. We have a number of PhD and master's students, undergrads, and during the summers we have high school interns. So the MakeAbility Lab's mission is to design, build, and study interactive tools and techniques to address high-value social problems. And we do so by combining bits and atoms. So in this sort of space called digital physical computing. So for example, we attempt to apply interactive computational methods to solve both physical world and digital questions. For example, how can we leverage computation and human-computer interaction to increase knowledge about and access to the physical world? Or how can we build new physical artifacts imbued with computation to seamlessly couple bits and atoms? So the MakeAbility Lab has 4 focus areas: environmental sustainability, health and wellness, accessibility, and STEM education, which is the focus of the talk today. But let me just briefly give you a broader view here. So for example, a project in environmental sustainability is work that I'm doing with my PhD student, Matt Moriello, and we're exploring methods in, our vision is basically pervasive thermography. So how can we use computer vision, machine learning, and mobile tools to allow end users to survey the city and look at sustainability questions and problems with buildings. Another one is in accessibility, particularly mapping accessibility issues in the physical world. We recently launched a beta version of this tool called Project SIDEWALK. You can go to projectsidewalk.io to check it out. And it's an online tool that empowers anyone, from interested citizens to government workers, to map physical accessibility issues in the real world. And you virtually walk through the city. This is through Google Street View. So here we're marking a curb that doesn't have a curb ramp, so disallowing people from getting down. And we use game design techniques to try to sustain participation and encourage people to use the system. So I encourage you to check that out. And this is a very, very large, huge effort. It's also NSF-funded. And I just want to point to a few people here. My collaborator, David Jacobs, who's a professor in computer vision, his student Jin Sun, and Kotaro Hara and Manaswi Saha, who've done a large part of this work. And so now for our main topic in STEM education and learning. So involving children in creative design activities and STEM experiences is critically important. In fact, the National Research Council suggests that as early on as kindergarten, children should be actively involved in scientific inquiry. However, science educators and researchers continue to face serious challenges promoting STEM learning. Children often see science as boring and particularly disconnected from their life. There's questions of, well, why am I learning this, and what value is it to me? And the scientific process itself is often fixed and formulaic, sort of disallowing children from exploring their own questions, from testing their own theories and inquiries about the world. So building on the work of Lee and colleagues at Utah, we're interested in exploring the role of wearable technology in improving and expanding and engaging access to STEM learning experiences. Wearables can be an engaging vehicle for building scientific skills They provide unprecedented data about our lives that's inherently personalized because it's about us, and it actively engages the body in learning. It's this sort of notion of embodied learning, tying the brain and the body together through learning experiences. So I want to talk to you today about 3 projects: BODYVIS, SharedViz, and MakerWear. And before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that these are very complex problems, and I am a computer scientist, so I take a very technological approach. But clearly, any solution is going to be multifaceted. That's going to include new policy, teacher training, new kinds of classroom practices, and also embracing notions of child agency in the scientific process, sort of allowing them to experiment with the world and fail. And I also want to acknowledge my collaborators, particularly my co-PI, Tamara Clegg, who is a professor in the College of Education and in the College of Information Studies, as well as the vast amount of students who've worked on this. And finally, my partners, the list is here, including the Boys and Girls Club of America and local school districts who've really been central to enabling this work. So first, BODYVIS. BODYVIS started really with 3 questions. First, what if our clothes could reveal how our bodies functioned? And second, how could this change the way children learn about and understand their bodies? And finally, could a t-shirt or other fabric be a platform for experimentation and inquiry in the world? For example, could children ask, does my heart beat faster when running versus reading a book, and why? How does my breathing rate compare to my classmates, and why may this be? And finally, how does food travel through my body? To address these questions, over the last 3 years, we built numerous BODYVIS prototypes. Shown here is prototype 1. And prototypes have become more refined and added additional features over time. So let me just dive into prototype 1. In this prototype, we used plush stuffed fabric with embedded electronics, and we sensed the wearer's heart rate through an infrared pulse finger sensor, shown here. So you see the heart is illuminating to the wearer's heart rate, and we're also showing oxygen delivery to the lungs there. In addition, some organs are detachable. So for example, this child can look at the 4 meters of intestine that are inside his body. Prototype 3 has streamlined organs, and we added additional sensing. Now we can sense respiration, so breathing rate, and we do digestion as well. So I'll show you a video.
Prototype 3 offers new and additional sensing and visualization. The heart and lungs visualize wearer's live heart rate and breathing rate. The snack time button initiates the digestive system visualization. A video illustrates food breakdown in the stomach. In this case, we use an apple slice. Sound effects indicate the end of digestion. Magnetic removable organs allow children to explore different layers of the human body. Outlines and colored highlighters guide the reattachment of organs, which automatically begin working if placed in the proper position.
How does this work exactly? I think it's worth diving into this just a bit. So it is an e-textile. It's an electronic textile. It's a mixture of fabric and electronics, and it's wearable. So let's just look at the heart here. You notice that, and this is really critical, we added in prototype 3 the ability to remove organs, and if they're placed back in the proper position, they automatically start working. And what allows for that are these magnets, and we actually conduct the signal through the magnets themselves. And then there's embedded LEDs and vibro-motors, which we also added because the wearer then can sense interesting phenomena. Okay. The lungs are similar. Here we're using flexible LED strips and magnets again for conducting the signal. The stomach is interesting. It's an adapted Galaxy S4 smartphone. We've removed the battery, so it's quite light, actually. It's externally powered and a wearable pack on the back. And the stomach serves as sort of the brains, just a little strange, but from a computational standpoint, it serves as the brains. It wirelessly communicates with the physiological sensor, does some processing, and then communicates with the other embedded electronics. So for the physiological sensor, we actually use a military-grade physiological sensor by a Maryland company called Zephyr. It's called the bioharness. And that measures a whole bunch of different physiological signals, including heart and breathing rate, as well as movement. And as I said, that wirelessly communicates to the phone, which then communicates with embedded microcontrollers that are stitched into the shirt. So we've done a lot of different kinds of evaluations over the last 3 years of this project across learning contexts with over 200 children, including at after-school programs, science camps, and elementary schools, and this has been a lot of fun, and that's why it's really cool to have a dynamic team of undergrads and fellow professors to kind of go and do these different deployments. So I'm just going to focus on some of the results that we've had, particularly on kind of the interactive experiences and how it might lead to opportunities for new kinds of learning. So the first thing you'll notice if you do a deployment with us is just the high engagement and curiosity that it stimulates amongst the children. And one of the key things for us really is getting them active in brainstorming, thinking about, and using physical actions to ask and answer questions about the body. And so you even saw some of that in the video here. So there's different ways that we've kind of engaged them that we've observed in our deployment. So one is through balancing activities, running in place, running around the room, eating, touching, and flexing muscles. Also exploring different layers of the body. So that was, as I said, enabled in prototype 3 and 4, that you can add or remove layers, enabling you to sort of get a deeper look into different facets of the body. So here you're seeing someone add or remove their own layers. But it also led to sort of unexpected social collaborations around this. So children would add and remove layers from other people's bodies. And also supporting pretend play. While we've explored ways to automatically measure when people are eating, when children are eating, right now it's currently a snack time button, if you remember from that video. And so, it's not necessary that you would actually eat while the shirt is showing visualization of digestion, and yet children choose to. So it's kind of interesting how it kind of engages them in this pretend play and exploring science that way. For some unexpected things, we never expected there to be disembodied use. So here you're seeing BODYVIS. Usually towards the end of the session, we'll have it on a mannequin, and children will come up to it and play with it. So here, exploring the different layers. And perhaps most interesting, you're getting this sort of disembodied use where someone will actually wear the wireless sensor, and then that will communicate over to the shirt. And then finally, and I think most interesting for the rest of this talk, is it stimulated lots of questions about, well, how did you build this and how does it work? And perhaps this is an obvious question, but we didn't actually expect them to be particularly interested in the engineering sides. And so the back of the shirt, we'd allow them to sort of open it up and see the wiring in different aspects like that. So here you're sort of seeing questions of, how is it all hooked up? In terms of learning, so in these initial studies, these are in informal learning contexts, we weren't particularly driven to look at these learning questions, but we did do pre and posts, and we've done a lot of follow-up work now with elementary schools where we've explored this in more depth. But one of the keys to this, when you're looking at body knowledge, is body maps, so you actually have children sketch their knowledge of how the body works. And we did see 73% including in their post questionnaires and their post sketches, including at least one new organ, so that's a nice positive effect. 56% of children corrected at least one organ, and 30% improved organ shape. However, interestingly, 53% had errors on pre-tests that were never rectified on their post-tests, and 10% added organ but in the wrong position, and then 10% actually removed organs that they had correct previously. And so there's room for improvement. And now I just want to pause here and have you look at this photo. And what do you notice? That's right. There's this very interesting asymmetry that's occurring here. You've designed a wearable for the person that's sensing their data, but they can't really see it very easily. And it leads to a lot of experiences like this. Where they're looking down rather than being, looking outward at the world. So it became clear to us that we needed to design new kinds of interactive experiences for this. So yeah, they look downwards. Thank you. I'm so happy you attended. you deserve a muffin. But that's a nice segue into our next tool that we built called SharedViz. And SharedViz was designed specifically for collaborative learning opportunities. So this is a mixed reality system, which means that it merges both the virtual and physical together. And it is wearable, but not in the same way that BODYVIS is. Here we're only using wearable for sensing, not for visualization. Instead, visualization occurs on this large screen display. We also use a Connect camera, which is an RGB depth camera. So rather than just getting colors, the camera also gets depth information. And then, as I mentioned, these physiological sensors that children are wearing. So all of this is wirelessly communicated to a laptop for processing, and then we do live visualizations on this screen. And so I'm going to play now a couple-minute video just to give you a video overview of all of the different kinds of tools and techniques that we've used in SharedViz.
SharedViz consists of 3 interactive prototypes and learning activities called Magic Mirror, Moving Graphs, and Animal Avatar. Magic Mirror uses an augmented reality approach to allow children to see inside their functioning bodies. Body parts animate in real time based on sense physiology. For example, lungs inflate and deflate based on a child's sensed breathing rate. Children can also use their bodies and gestures to interact with and play body learning games. Moving Graphs transforms live body data into graph form, supporting in situ hypothesis generation and testing, as well as social comparisons. Children brainstorm activities that they think will make their heart rate speed up or slow down, and then test these activities in a competition. This design is aimed at building graph literacy skills, introducing basic statistical concepts, and allowing children to answer questions about how and why our bodies react to different kinds of physical activities. With Animal Avatar, children can actually become different animals, such as chickens, elephants, or grasshoppers, whose respiratory systems respond to the children's own sensed physiology. Visualizations allow children to make comparisons between the anatomy and physiology of humans versus other animals. We evaluated SharedViz with 69 children in local after-school programs. We collected pre- and post-questionnaires, observational notes, video and audio recordings, and performed 6 post-study interviews with after-school program facilitators. We analyzed behavioral indicators of engagement, children's physical and social interactions, the impact of games, and design preferences. Children reported liking Magic Mirror because of how it mirrored body movements, its use of physical interactions like gestures, and how it showed internal parts of the body actually working. With Moving Graphs, children reported that they enjoyed comparing their heart rates to one another and testing their activity hypotheses in the competitions. For Animal Avatar, children liked being able to compare between animals and humans and reported enjoying learning about and seeing how different animals breathe. Although the primary intent of this study was to investigate the usability and potential of our tools, we did compare pre- and post-questionnaire data to gain preliminary understanding of learning effectiveness. Body map scores significantly improved between the pre- and post-questionnaires. Finally, the after-school program facilitators were positive about the potential of SharedViz to engage children in learning. Noted benefits included the authentic connection between body data and activities, the importance of physicality and mimicry, for example, the live, reactive 3D anatomical models of the body, and SharedViz's ability to make STEM learning experience more relevant and fun.
Right, so that was SharedViz, and you can see the dramatic difference in sort of the way in which the children are interacting together compared to BODYVIS. And now, when we work with elementary schools, we actually deploy both tools at the same time. And children can choose which tool is best to fit the kind of question that they have. So one of the things the video didn't show is that we have, and over these multi-day assessments, we'll have them on day one, sort of brainstorm activities that they can test, and then iterate throughout that and go through the whole scientific inquiry process of analysis, testing, hypothesis testing, and so on. Okay, so this brings me to my last tool. Both my colleague Tamara Clegg in the College of Education and I strongly believe in constructionist style learning. And you'll note that the first 2 tools don't allow children to really build. It allows them to design their own scientific inquiry, experiences, but it doesn't allow them to actually build wearables. And remember that photo I showed you where the children were just so engaged in looking at how these e-textiles were designed. So that brought us, it made us wonder basically, could we enable children to build their own wearables? And so that's the NSF career work that Nevenka had mentioned. So that's this project here. So wearable construction kits, such as LilyPad and Flora, are incredibly popular. And they've shown promise in attracting underrepresented groups to STEM, expanding perceptions of computing, and empowering users to create self-expressive and personally meaningful computational designs. And one of the cool things about wearables is that you're augmenting your everyday experience, right? So what you design can go with you. So here they're designing bags and t-shirts and scarves in a workshop, and these designs can go with them as they go to school, as they take the bus, as they go to the mall, and so on. And so that's fundamentally different than like a robotic kit, which stays in a classroom or is for a fixed, kind of fixed environment. These e-textile toolkits, however, require programming, an understanding of circuits, and manual craft skills like sewing and soldering. And so though this complexity allows for really creative and increasingly sophisticated designs, what Resnick and Silverman explain as wide walls and high ceilings for tools. It also presents significant challenges to young children and can actually even impede adult hobbyists from rapid prototyping and tinkering with their designs. So indeed, the vast majority of literature that's been studying e-textiles as a platform for learning is with high school students. There's some with middle school, but there's none really that we could find with elementary school students, and I think it's because of these barriers that I pointed out. So in our work, we're seeking to address how can we enable young children, the elementary age, to design and build their own interactive wearables? For example, what are the appropriate abstractions and higher level behaviors that children might want to use? What aspects can we simplify, and how is the system programmed? And what do children want to build, and how can we support these goals? And finally, how does working with our tools and techniques impact skill development and perceptions of STEM? So this is a 5-year research agenda, and I'm going to quickly go through it. We're in year 1 right now, and I, again, want to emphasize that the long-term agenda here is to allow children to design for their everyday experience. So for example, if you're in ballet, you can create something that recognizes a pirouette and, and flashes lights or vibrates based on that. If you play soccer, if you're on a soccer team, you could help design your own jerseys, electronic jerseys. So we have a 2-year iterative design process. Even before the work was funded, that's the secret. So we had participatory design sessions with children, and we also had design probe sessions once we had some early prototypes with STEM educators. Then we refined the prototypes, did some pilot studies in local museums and after-school programs, and then finally we conducted single and multi-session workshops. So for the participatory design process, we use a method called cooperative inquiry, where you use intergenerational partners to design new kinds of technology, to design and test technology for children. So sometimes people are like, well, that doesn't seem like that's too difficult. I was a child once, weren't we all? But you weren't a child in 2017, right? Most of us. There's one young person back there. And I think that's very thought-provoking, right? So, and just really trying to understand perception, conception of what children want to build and why. And so in early sessions, we used low-fidelity materials like foam and markers and cardboard to sort of explore that. What do children want to build without placing any technological barrier? And then in later sessions, children will help us test initial prototypes. Here you're seeing a fabric prototype. And we also compared our kits to other kinds of kits out there, like robotics kits. In one of these sessions, we adapted LittleBits, which is a very popular electronics kit, to be wearable through Velcro, and just allowed children to design through that.
This one's the Morse code shoe.
Oh, you guys are communicating. So this girl decided to design a social communication device through her shoe, right? So there's a lot of different kinds of themes that emerge from these participatory design sessions, and I won't go into each one, but you'll notice that we had social interaction emerge there. Very commonly, they wanted designs to react to their body movement and physiology and respond to their environment and augment their play experiences. We also did these exploratory sessions with STEM educators, and overall, they were quite positive about our designs, particularly wearables as this engaging platform for STEM, and the high tinkerability and wide walls that our platform supports. They also had new ideas for modules, better support for lo-fi materials. As it turns out, you'll see that we have now support for lo-fi materials. We didn't have at the time. And then child-friendly iconography and text. That is the question of, can I look at a module and know what it is, right? So we worked very hard on that. So I'll just go over the MakerWear system now. It's been informed by these participatory design sessions and our own experiences with e-textiles over the course of 4 or 5 years. So it's comprised of 2 parts. The first are these tangible modules. So the system is programmed not via a computer, but literally by placing these tangible modules together. And it creates these really emergent and cool interactive behaviors. And then the second part is this magnetic socket mesh. So this allows us to bypass the need to do any sewing, and the children can just place these modules on this mesh, and things will start working right away. And again, we use magnets for conducting the signal. And there are 5 module types. The power module powers everything, that's the start. Then we have sensors that sense and translate physical phenomena into electrical signals. Modifiers modify the electrical signal. Actions do something back into the physical world, like turn on lights or spin motors. And then finally, we have this catch-all miscellaneous. Okay, and we've currently designed 32 modules, so 12 sensors, including motion, sunlight, and color detectors, temperature, sound, light, and heartbeat sensors, 9 actions, 7 modifiers, 3 miscellaneous, and you're like, well, there's 4, but the wire start and wire end is one category, and 1 power. But it's perhaps best to look at this not based on these sort of 5 types, but instead of the themes that we were trying to support that kind of came out of those participatory design sessions, particularly movement and physiology, changing environment, social communication, and then for more advanced users as they gain experience, more sophisticated kind of electrical processing of the signal. Very, very quickly, these are all custom designed, and there are 4 layers, each of these modules. We build them in our lab. We actually do outsourcing for the printed circuit boards. A company does that for us, but then we put everything together ourselves. So layer 1 is the exposed electronic component, so the children can see that. Layer 2 is a laser cut module cover that's colored by type and has an icon and label. Layer 3 is the custom PCB with a microcontroller and surface mount components. And then layer 4 has the neodymium battery and contact spring for socket connection. So these are like little springs, which enables a very tight connection when they place them into the socket. Without those springs, they would have to fidget a lot to get those connections to be really strong. So that was a nice engineering insight. And then the socket mesh serves 2 primary functions. First, it's an easy, robust way of getting your wearable design into a material, a wearable material. And then secondly, it provides power, ground, and the communication wire. So a lot of the underlying electronics are actually in the mesh itself. And we have 2 types of socket meshes. Some are pre-sewn into fabric, like hats and vests and jackets and things that are easy to take on and off during our sessions. And then the other is a fabric patch. So, which enabled like really kind of interesting things like designing jewelry and things. We didn't expect that, but you basically during our sessions you could Velcro that onto anything you wanted. Okay. All right, so let's create something with MakerWear. This is just a short video of how to do that.
Every design in MakerWear must start with a power module. Connections are made by matching the input and output triangles, for example to turn on a light. Then by adding a modifier, in this case a volume knob, we can modify the signal that travels to subsequent modules. To add interactivity, we need to add a sensor to our design. In this case, let's replace the volume knob with a distance sensor. The distance sensor modifies its output signal proportional to sensed distance. We can easily add other actions such as the sound maker or the spinner, which work instantly as soon as they are placed. It's easy to create completely different interactive behaviors simply by using new combinations of modules. For example, let's replace the distance sensor with a sound sensor. We can use more advanced modules to create sophisticated behaviors. In this case, let's count the number of times I snap my fingers. We can do this with a counter and a number module.
So in that case, that's one of the more advanced modules, and we wouldn't expect the younger children to necessarily be able to do that right away. But that's counting the falling edge of basically a clock on the MakerWear system. So in terms of evaluations, we've done workshops mainly, which is a common method to kind of evaluate toolkits. So with a total of 32 children with an average age of 8 years old, we've done 2 single session workshops and 3 4-session workshops with our partners. I'm going to kind of skip through this method quickly, but children were grouped into session based on age. And we also asked about technology experience in a pre-study questionnaire. And generally, these children had used technology. They had been exposed to graphical programming. About half had been exposed to graphical programming languages and electronic toolkits. And then the sessions themselves included a pre-study questionnaire, a brief introduction to MakerWear, a 70-minute block for children to play with MakerWear, and then a post-study questionnaire. And the multi-sessions were largely the same, but we were able to incrementally introduce more modules and do more kinds of design challenges where we would stop whatever making activity the children were doing, and then we would give them a design prompt and actually have them build out something, and that was used for assessment. So let me just quickly skip this method, and here is our research focus. So we had, multiple foci here: how children make with MakerWear, what they make, and the challenges therein, their overall understanding of the electronic system and what they were programming, computational thinking skills like sequencing, branching, and logic, and subjective factors like enjoyment. And for the multi-sessions, this enabled us to have children actually designed for their own lives. The single sessions were, too short for that. They're only about 95 to 100 minutes. So we wanted to explore what would children design and what would they think about designing, and then how did their knowledge progress over time and age-related differences. So I don't have time to go into all of those results, but for our data, we looked at session video, design challenge performance, end-user creations, artifact-based interviews where we'd actually just ask spontaneously what you were making and why to sort of get an understanding of what the children were thinking about, in post-study questionnaires. So here's just quickly some findings. So first of all, children of all ages enjoyed building with MakerWear. And even the youngest users were able to understand basic concepts. So though they did struggle initially with things like sequencing and particularly things like logic and using those blue modules more than the older users. But what you're seeing here are all children under 7 years old. And about half the children spent, and this is sort of interesting and unique to wearables, about half the children spent their time iteratively building and testing their designs while wearing them. So they're actively building on themselves, which is kind of interesting. And then the other half primarily built on a table and then sort of infrequently switched to testing on their bodies. Another aspect is transparency. So how do they understand what they're building? And it was interesting to see how they would appropriate modules to do that. So just listen to him talk. This is an artifact-based interview, for example.
The blue light tells you that there's definitely not something wrong with the power supply.
So he's using a light to tell himself that there's definitely not something wrong with the power supply and that there must be a problem later on in his design. Another thing that was unexpected was the use of the wire module. So wire modules allow you to skip sockets. So we expected this. We expected children to, interface with multiple things, for example, this armband to the vest. What we did not expect is for children to interface with one another through these wires.
I'll save you! Come on, let's go!
Hey, Julian and Blake, what did you make over there?
So, say, I'm endangered, I do this,
Color of your skin.
and, he comes, and then...
So the wire itself is mediating play and also facilitating co-design. So to make this, they had to work together, which I think was really, really interesting and neat. And then also creating new behaviors that we never expected. And I think that's one of the beauties of creating these toolkits, is sort of seeing how they enable new kinds of creativity. This is a 6-year-old.
So what did you make?
A little, sort of, oscillator.
Uh-huh.
So the fan spins the little piece of tape and paper over the distance sensor, and then every time it flies over, sensor senses it, turns on a light.
So the way this works is there's a distance sensor, and it's the light is flashing because every time the fan makes a rotation, the distance sensor senses that and then actuates the light. So, yeah. This was at a children's museum, so I think the parents and children that are going to these things are are semi-unique. Yeah, so for the final projects, now this is only for the multi-session. So it's interesting to ask, so what did children want to make? And what did they make? So 38% of the projects were sports and fitness. So in this case, this is a lacrosse stick that this young girl brought in to modify. 31% did role play, very commonly like superheroes, like Spider-Man, or in this case, this is a ninja. Sociodramatic play, there was a few different scenarios. One was from Harry Potter and creating sort of magic and casting spells, and this one was with Pokemon. And then 13% were other, mainly like aesthetic or just fun, whimsical kind of designs that were hard to categorize. In terms of what did they sense, the themes were movement was primary, and then manual input, something that required like physical actuation, and then the changing environment, physiology, and social. And then this is really the last piece of this talk, and it's just a video summary of some of the projects that the children designed, starting with this 6-year-old boy.
Using pipe cleaners and ping pong balls attached to a servo motor, this 6-year-old boy made a wrecking ball superhero armband for his final project. Inspired by light-up shoes that react when you move, a 7-year-old boy made his own light-up socks with a motion detector, lights, and a vibromotor. The most common theme for final projects was sports and fitness. For example, this 9-year-old boy made an armband that pulsed lights and sounds according to his heart rate. Some children brought in their own objects to customize. This 9-year-old girl built a smart lacrosse stick.
So I used my lacrosse stick and I made a thing that would detect if someone was about to check me to try to get the ball.
And this 9-year-old boy built an e-textile vest that wirelessly controlled his Pokemon doll using infrared senders and receivers.
I'm putting the sender of the receiver and I'm going to activate something on this one. It sends it to this one and activates something else.
Finally, perhaps the most sophisticated design was by this 11-year-old boy who made a fitness tracker that counted steps and rewarded step counts above 900 with flashing lights and sound.
This, whenever you get to 900, it starts beeping and like making noises and flashy lights and stuff. There we go.
So that very last piece, the reason why the step counter went off is he actually built in, he used one of our sine wave generators to simulate a step so that he could demo it for us. I mean, absolutely incredible. So really, really cool. All right, very quickly on future work. One of the first things that we're looking at doing is trying to streamline this and make it smaller and more lightweight. And so you could see here an early prototype that's much, much thinner and less rigid. Another is actually combining new kinds of interfaces to allow more advanced users to do sophisticated programming. So we are going to bring in a tablet and allow children to wirelessly program, those that want to, using a block-based language like Scratch. And then something that plays a central role in my NSF career proposal is allowing children to interactively use machine learning to automatically recognize physical action. So for example, can you build a jersey or like a soccer shoe that recognizes when you kick? Or I had mentioned that ballet example before, different dance maneuvers, and actually does different things based on a maneuver that the child is doing. And then kind of tying everything together, I'm really interested in allowing children to build their own wearable scientific instruments. So for example, we don't have this yet, but we want to build an NO2, so a nitrogen dioxide sensor that they could sense different air pollution from, if they're waiting for the bus, if they're going to school, if they're at home, and they can kind of compare that to get them engaged into different kinds of scientific questions. So now I've shown you 3 projects, and I've gone through them very, very quickly, but I think my hope is that it shows you potential opportunities for new ways to engage children into STEM learning. And I want to close with a quote that I use with my students, and it's about climate change, but I think it has more of a broad appeal, and I use it really to motivate my own work and life. So how many generations in all of human history have had the opportunity to rise to a challenge that is worthy of our best efforts, a challenge that can pull from us more than we think we can do? So thank you very much. Hi. Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I hadn't observed that myself about the video, so I'm going to have to go back and cover our bases a bit, because actually 50% of the attendees were female. There's a lot of examples to pull from, and I think we were just trying to find a diverse array of them. I didn't see any gender differences. I mean, I would be a little bit uncomfortable with speculating on that because we only had 32 children. I can tell you that the literature with robotics toolkits says that those are largely male-dominated, and there's been some recent work that's tried to diversify participation in that, but the sort of traditional like Lego Mindstorm competitions and things tend to appeal more to boys than girls, and I am, as I motivated this earlier, really looking into how we might start to engage children who may not otherwise think about computer science and engineering in new kinds of ways through e-textiles. So thanks for your comment. We'll go in the back first. MakerWear. Mm. Prototypes, yeah. Yeah. I think there's a variety of things going on. One is it's just, sports and fitness have an everyday appeal, right? And, a lot of children participate in sports, and so they're thinking about it. It could be Fitbit and quantified self-movements. Maybe their parents are engaged in that, and they're kind of aware of it. It's also, of course, a representation of the kinds of modules that we had at the time. So our module library has 32 modules. And at first you might think, well, gosh, that's so many. Like, I didn't even understand half the modules you talked about. And we did incrementally introduce them during our workshops. But if you look at like Scratch Junior, which is just a programming interface for kids on the tablet, and that's built for elementary school kids, that has, I think, 40 different kinds of functions or so. So we're right on that level. And I think like if we're going to do workshops in the future, we might theme them to maybe, especially for single session. Multi-session, you have much more opportunity to go in depth and engage more people. But so I think it might be just a representation of those three things: interests, technology trends, and our module library. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a very complex question. I think, yeah. Well, then you probably know the literature on your, the likelihood of your children going to an Ivy League school. It's very, very high. So I think that's great. Like, one is like, what's the representation? And for that one child, like I said, that was from the Children's Museum exhibit. I actually pulled that from a pilot study. It wasn't actually from our workshops. Our workshops were with Baltimore Boys and Girls Clubs, which, I don't know. Whoops, might have to edit that out. But anyway, and they were just, attending Boys and Girls Club during the summer. But of course they did have to sign up, and their parents had to have some involvement in that for consent. So, I think there's always an issue with who are you studying. So it's a good question. I don't know if I have a good answer. In terms of Scratch, that's Mitchell Resnick. I would say that's probably the most popular and common programming language for children, and really has revolutionized the way people see programming, because even Scratch Junior is targeted at ages 5 to 7, and then Scratch is 8 and up, even through high school. So just giving them a sense of computational thinking. I think even the CS for All initiative, which Obama started, and I'm guessing will stop now, but there is this sense of trying to get computational thinking and those skills down into the elementary school ages. So yeah, you should give Scratch a try. Maybe worth an evening of time. So Scratch uses a storybook interface, so you create interactive stories, whereas here you're creating interactive wearables. But there is a lot of analog between the two. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, I think that's like the utopic ideal vision of the future, but is a very, very complex one. So one of the things, again, about Scratch that's wonderful is you need a web browser. And this requires physical access, and it requires, right now, manual labor. There's actually no current manufacturing process that can do what we do in our lab at scale to create these things. Like the integration of these electronics into fabric, the socket mesh, just requires a lot of manual labor. It would require lots of work in industrial engineering to get that off the ground. So I think in the short term, in the next 5 years, we're just interested in sort of studying, question at a smaller level, and we have been working with the Office of Technology Commercialization here to sort of see if there's opportunities for us to scale it up, but it would require a lot of work. But many of these questions that we're interested in, like this interactive machine learning, which is sort of a nice pivot, again, we can study that at sort of the small scale. Like, what are the appropriate ways to feed back information to allow a child to understand how they're programming something? And it turns out that the current technology, for those skeptics out there, like Kinect, the Microsoft Kinect, which is Xbox's depth camera, you do calibration. You're actually kind of programming it by demonstration when you're first initializing the system. And so there are ways that I think kids are getting exposed to machine learning that they just don't know it. And that's what we're interested in. Like, if a child does a certain kind of jumping jacks, spins, can they program the system to react differently? And what kind of feedback interfaces do we need to design to allow a child to understand that the system's not going to recognize that because they just gave them a bad example? Like, that jump looks too close to a spin. Right. So I think that's really one of the areas I'm quite interested in moving this project in the future. Yes. I think Navenka is looking like we need to wrap up, but we could do one. That came out of the class that I was teaching, and because these overview talks I don't have a chance to really go into depth, but there's this amazing project that I actually ended up using in my teaching, in my grad course, from NYU, which has this master's program, Interactive Technology, ITP it's called, and these students, for one of their master's works, created a shirt that visualized pollution. Like, the idea was, if you were out on a New York street, and it may have had NO2 or carbon dioxide sensor or something, and it showed your lungs kind of, getting muddled and brown. And a student saw that who had an interest in STEM learning and educational experiences, and we sort of riffed on that to design outward from that. So like every one of these projects, obviously has a root somewhere, and that one was in my grad class. And then in terms of the curriculum, I would say originally we did a very poor job in our initial sort of examinations because it was very open-ended, but I didn't really know what I was doing. And since I partnered with the College of Education and also the elementary school districts, we worked very closely with the teachers to, through participatory design activities, design all the curriculum. So we're now in our second year of the curriculum, and I think it's getting to be very solid. The focus is not just on anatomy and body learning, although that's interesting, but it's scientific inquiry skills. So it's using the body as a platform for learning about science. Yeah. Me too. Me and you. Right, so I didn't get into that. It's in our research paper. There were certain kids who just never challenged themselves or gave themselves an opportunity to even explore the more sophisticated aspects of MakerWear. So all the blue modules, which I quickly skipped over, those are the more complex ones. So for example, there's a threshold module that allows them to set up conditional logic, and which is key to computational thinking, but is actually pretty advanced. And so I think it was only in the older sessions did we see anybody really use those kinds of modules. So I think there's I guess there's a question of, do we even, is it necessary for children as young as 5 to understand that, to be engaged and to build new cool things? And I think we've seen that it's not necessary for them to understand that stuff, and maybe this can be an entryway or vehicle so that later they will. But yeah, I think there's a lot more work to do on looking at these more sophisticated designs and how we can kind of scaffold kids into using them. That's a great question. And again, I didn't have time to go over that. It was a mixture. When we first introduced MakerWear, we had 3 scenarios that we acted out, and with the research assistants, so they could see pre-made designs and sort of see how things, the possibilities. And that was based on literature and how you might design these workshops. And then we did a range. Sometimes we would just give them modules. Other times we'd quickly show them how to work. Largely, we would just give them and allow them to learn through play, which is the ideal. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm. Mm. Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you for, right. Yeah, I mean, I think first, thank you for that, and please feel free to follow up with me. I think, something I mentioned in my NSF career was that misrecognitions are opportunities for learning, and no doubt there will be a lot of those, but I think they'll be able to, hopefully if we design the interfaces correctly, gain a better understanding of what machine learning is and some data science aspects of it. So, but I completely agree that the body is very sophisticated and able to do a wide range of things. So.
This was really, really very impressive. Your research is great. I mean, we all want to be children again.
Yeah.
Yeah, and something else that I was also very impressed, and this is the librarian talking, I was impressed by all the citations that you had on your slides. Good job.
Thank you.
So please, let's thank Jon again for this fantastic talk.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.